Welcome to Concept to Creation, a podcast featuring entrepreneurs who share their business journey. We'll hear what motivated them to turn their dreams into a business. They'll share stories from the trenches of business, from raising capital, creating products or services, navigating regulations, hiring employees, and managing competition and growth. We'll discover their successes and failures, and they'll provide advice for budding entrepreneurs. Now, here's your host and fellow entrepreneur, Mike Conrad.
Welcome back to episode number 4 of the Concept to Creation podcast. Thanks for joining me today. I have 2 guests coming up in just a moment from a company that I've known for, I think, the day they started 30 years ago, and that would be Kaizen. Welcome, Mike Bixenman, Dr. Mike Bixenman, and Tom Forsythe from Kyzen Corporation. Welcome to Concept to Creation. Thanks for being my guest today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Well, we've known each other for many, many, many years, probably more years than we all care to admit. So talk to me about Kaizen, first of all. Let's give for the 1 or 2 people in our universe that has never heard of Kaizen, why don't one of you tell me a little bit about what Kaizen does and you know where you are in this electronic assembly space?
Well, it's
Tom, you want to take?
Sure. And you know, electronic assembly is an interesting business, right, Mike? We're all in the same marketplace, and it's the biggest little business in the world, right? And that it's this gargantuan, hundreds of billions of dollars, or I guess these days maybe trillions. We seem to be moving into trillion land industry, but yet it's really. It turns out it's a small group of people to kind of make it go, right? Because it's a very specialized world. And our part of that, much like yours, is the cleaning part, right? You're the mechanical part of the cleaning part. You're the cleaning machine, and we're the cleaning agent, or as my neighbors say, we're the soap. Because, you know, your neighbors never really know what you do. And like you know, we started out back in the day with when the Montreal protocols were just being signed. There were only 40 signatories to it when we were getting going. Now it's pretty much the whole world, 100 and some odd countries, almost 200, I think. And that CFC ban was what created the opportunity for us. CFCs were the ubiquitous cleaner in the electronics world. One of the CFCs, of course, more commonly they're refrigerants and that kind of stuff.
And for our audience's benefit, the CFCs were the chlorofluorocarbons that were in the solvents that were used to clean circuit boards back in the day, right?
Right, and those chlorofluorocarbons were discovered back, I guess, in the 30s and 40s, and they were kind of they were believed to be miracle materials. You know, they were not flammable. They were perceived from a physical perspective. They were non-hazardous. I guess if you fell into a pot of it, you could drown. But other than that, they really didn't harm people. But then back in the late 80s, they found data from NASA flights over the South Pole where they discovered the infamous hole in the ozone layer. And after work and whatnot, they attributed that to these chlorofluorocarbons. And it was really the first global treaty on the environment that did something. And in fact, in short order, from the late 80s to the mid 90s, CFCs were banned or on a steep glide slope to being banned. And that's what Kaizen was created to do, to say, gee, this electronics world used one of those materials to clean, and everybody seemed to do it. And surely there'd be room for us. Yeah,
so you saw
that in a nutshell is why the company got started and the opportunity we pursued, and you know, 30 years later, we've got people in a dozen countries and distributors and I don't know 50 or 60 and customers in 50 or 60 countries and lots of frequent flyer miles.
Yeah, for sure. And we're gonna get to the success you are now, but we're gonna start at the beginning because you didn't start off that way. None of us start off that way, right? But going back to your point on what you were referring to as the Montreal Protocol, you said that was the first major environmental treaty, which is true. It also, here's a fun fact. It also is the only one of 2 treaties that have ever been ratified by every UN nation country. You know, normally not every country signs into something. The Geneva Convention was one, and the Montreal Protocol, which is the treaty you're referring to, was the other. No other treaty has been ratified by every member of the UN, of the United Nations, 211 members, whatever it is, it's up to now. Which now combine the two, an environmental treaty that the whole world signed on to, right? I often say that we're in such a polarized society today that if we decided to propose a treaty that said, let's all agree as a world that the sun goes up in the morning and goes down at night, we wouldn't get every nation to agree to that, right? There would be a holdout somewhere. But that was a pretty major piece of legislation. So you took environmental regulation, which most would view as an adverse condition, and turned it into a business opportunity, or you found a business opportunity within this governmental environmental regulation.
And that's right, Mike. I mean, maybe you could speak to that. I mean, that was kind of the driver in the early days.
Yeah, it was the event. You know, when we first look at that, and you know, we looked at the market, market opportunity. I can remember, and I was talking to Tom about this. There was a Circuits Assembly, publication article that was talking about the CFC market for cleaning and how large the market was. And, the people who jumped into this space early on, and we can think about Petrofirm, that with the, with their semi-aqueous material. Yeah, the bioac products. But it was an opportunity, and then when in those early days, Kyle and I had got together. It was Kyle was a very, very interesting person in his own right. His background, and he had introduced me to some people at Delphi Electronics, and as we got an opportunity to see what people were trying to do and what we could do to engineer materials to do that in a safer way, it just made a lot of sense, and so it was an opportunity. We were a lot younger back in that day and time, and when you write a business plan in the early beginning, you think it looks a whole lot easier than what it really is in the end. But from that point of view, it was something that we pursued, and we stayed focused during that period of time. That I think that was one of our key attributes of being successful. We didn't veer off that plane of what we were trying to accomplish, and so from that, you always run into certain roadblocks along the way. They're always going to be there, and how do you adjust? And one of the key things that we did from the beginning that I think turned out to be really, really successful is that every time we'd hit a benchmark, we'd try to bring on people who could help us achieve the ultimate goal, just like Tom. Tom was one of the early guys into this business, and he brought his background and his experience. And I think, surrounding ourselves with people along the way that could help us accomplish the overall objective was a piece of our success.
Yeah, interesting. You talked earlier you mentioned Kyle. I assume you're talking about Kyle Doyle, who's your co-founder, right? So Mike Bixenman and Kyle Doyle started Kaizen. Tom came on in the early days, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle is very happy to be the man behind the curtain, right? And the mad scientist.
Absolutely. And there was a phase where people thought I made Kyle up, that he didn't exist.
Right. Exactly. It's like the so-called sales manager at the car dealership. I have to check with the sales manager. There is no sales manager. Right. They just go back and drink coffee and put you in a sweatbox.
Well, and then the joke evolved into the Charlie's Angels guy, right? And,
right. The guy on the phone, yeah,
who did exist, right? But Kyle's is a giant driving force in the company. I mean, he's our CEO, and he's always been the visionary. And he and Mike together have worked on inventing the technology. which has, let's face it, we're at this 30 years. We're through. I don't even know how many generations of products at this point. Double digits, to be sure. It's such a big number that you don't talk about it anymore,
Right.
right? Because we of course are cleaning, as you know, Mike, is an odd critter in that it's a reactive process. The parts that people make, think of the electronic devices and how they've changed over the last 30 years that we've been all doing this.
Oh yeah.
Well, they don't look anything like they used to. The
No.
only thing that looks the same is the green FR4.
Right. The laminate stays the same. Everything on it is much more
Everything's
complex.
different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything's different. Well, and that goes for the parts, the markings, the components, and the connecting, the solder pastes and everything else. Well, we in the cleaning world have to react to that. We have to evolve and not screw up something new that got invented that's great, and likewise do a great job of removing some new contaminant that's marvelous, that occasionally is pretty challenging to clean when they first come out of the blocks. So we always describe ourselves as this very reactive. While we try to look forward, cleaning is fundamentally a reactive technology.
Sure.
And so it really requires us to be close to our customers, because otherwise they'll move and we won't know where they went.
That's right.
And that would be bad, right? So we try to stay very close to our customers, and that's another thing that Mike mentioned, that in those early days, as we would win business, we always try to stay engaged with those customers. Kind of the antithesis of the used car guy who hopes to never see that client again. We want to invite that client to our children's wedding and vice versa. We want to have that relationship, so when they start inventing something really breakthrough, which our clients do all the time, we'll actually get wind of it, because sometimes it takes more than a day to dream up a new technology. In fact, almost always it takes more than a day.
Yeah, I quote you regularly. You're one of my favorite things you've said, is, that I can repeat, is that you have to earn the business again, like every time the pail is empty, right? So every 5 gallons or so, you got to earn the business again. Unlike capital equipment, where it's expected to last 7 or 10 years or longer, and you don't just buy another one, after 30 days. So that definitely landed on me. Let's talk about Mike. Let's talk about some of the early days. So when you started Kaizen, when you and Kyle started Kaizen, shortly before Tom joined, there was both an opportunity with the government regulation, with the Montreal Protocol. The solvents that were traditionally used to clean circuit assemblies were going away. That opened the door to an alternative, environmentally responsible technology, which Kaizen came up with. But also, the Lord giveth and taketh away. The taketh away part is no clean flux came along, right? We're all at the same time. The solvents were going away, and then no clean flux came on the scene and said, oh, wait a minute, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You don't have to clean. Here's this magic formula. So at the same time, there was a new opportunity and a competitor at the time, which was no clean flux. So there was pros and cons in the time Kaizen had started. So jumping into the fray, into this new business opportunity, and it was definitely new. There was a couple of companies that made saponifiers, made water-based materials, but no one did it really well. They were, I remember this stuff. I won't say what we called it, pink stuff. Let's call it pink stuff. That was popular at the time, sold out of the Pacific Northwest. And that was, and then there was the solder companies all had their version of a saponifier, but they weren't very good at the time. So Kaizen had definitely an opportunity to create something that was novel, that actually worked. But it also had this phenomenon called no clean flux, where at least 70% of the industry stopped cleaning. The military folks, the space folks, the medical folks kept cleaning. That was our market back then, your market back then. But for the most part, all the commercial folks, if they could, they got rid of their vapor degreasers and their old inline cleaners, and they never went back, at least for a while. So in that environment, were you aware of that? Were you aware that there was a movement to not clean at all at the time you started Kaizen? And if you were aware of that, what made you think you could, either turn that tide or still thrive with a smaller market base?
Well, I would look at it this way. When we first looked at the industry that we were looking to be a part of, the electronics industry, we were thinking, man, this is an industry that is going to continue to evolve. It's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to innovate. So unlike any marketplace, there's always going to be competitive forces, but there's always going to be a place for specialized businesses like what Kaizen was. Now, it is true, the company that really won the day from the CFC environment was the no clean companies. But at the same time, as we looked at the high end companies, the military and defense contractors, and people where failure was not an option, even though no clean material sets were viable, they were still going to clean. That became a market niche that was truly there. The one thing that made it unique, though, is that none of those companies were going to adopt any material set without going through a rigorous test protocol. And also at that period of time, there was this, the standards groups were involved with, as well as the military people, and what we recall as the phase 2 testing. And part of that, if you were going to be a part of this industry, you had to pass that test. That was one of the early gates that we were faced with. But and I can recall back in the early days, the first 2 years we really didn't have a lot of revenue. I mean, we were in the midst of looking to try to get on, to be a viable company, a company that people had confidence that was going to be around, that was not going to be a fly-by-night organization. And so we, again, even though we knew water soluble was a viable option, no clean was a viable option, people who were in that classification that were going to clean, we stepped off and built, decided to start this business, and we were going to try to take it to where it led us. So from that perspective, it actually wasn't as big of a market opportunity, but it was a viable market opportunity. And as you know, Mike, is when no clean materials, it doesn't necessarily mean that people stop cleaning. I mean, if you're going to run no clean, it's a mindset. Everything's got to come in clean. So there was still very much a market there, and the real key was, how do we build ourselves around the market opportunity and become a viable player, a viable entity in this space?
We started at the same time as Kaizen did. We're about 1 year behind you. We'll have our 30th anniversary next year. So we had the same two pros and cons, this kind of bipolar entrance into business. One is great opportunity, the solvents are going away, and the other, so a water-based process from an equipment standpoint certainly had an opening, but at the same time, most of the industry was deciding not to clean at all. So, but because we started at zero, and you started at zero, there was really no place to go but up. Even if only 20% of the business was left, that's 100% opportunity, right? So it's not like you were selling trichloroethane or Freon TMS before, and all of a sudden you saw your business revenue drop. You started from zero. You mentioned earlier that in the early days, of course, the struggle was revenue. Of course, getting your first sale, it's 100% growth. The second sale is, diminishing returns after that. What was life like in the early days of Kaizen? So you and Kyle are sitting in a bar or a back room or some strategic place, figuring out that there's an opportunity and you want to capitalize on that opportunity. You need money, you need capital to capitalize on opportunity, and you need a business plan. So where'd the money come from? Where'd the business plan come from? And what was the process of obtaining those two things, the capital to start the business and the business plan itself?
Well, before we ever went into business, we wrote the business plan, and we basically used the business plan to seek out investment capital. And we had a small investor that did invest in the organization, but one of the key learnings that with investors that I took away, and Tom, you can comment on this as well, but when somebody invests in a business, they watch it pretty close, and they want to see progress relatively quickly, if they're going to continue their investment. And one of the things that we learned about this little niche that we were going into is that you had to get on that specification list before people were going to actually buy from you. There was a lot of work that had to go forth before you were going to start, generating revenues that were going to get you to a point where you could you could fund that enterprise yourself. So in those early days, we started out and we didn't hit those targets as fast as our investor wanted us to, and it all of a sudden, there wasn't a lot of cash, available. So, and Tom was in those early days where we all sucked it up and we said, look, we started living off our credit cards. We believed in ourselves, and
Yep.
we're going to fund it. We're going to fund it moving forward. And in some respects, those were hard days, but those were days that we learned a lot. But they actually turned out to be good days as well, because it kept us tightly focused on where it was that we were trying to go, and that was
one of the big learnings too, that focus, right? And to kind of put it in context with our investor, who was a great guy, and he took a flyer on an idea, but fundamentally, investors have portfolios. Many of us have been to business school. We understand portfolio management. Whereas entrepreneurs, at least the ones that succeed, tend to be more known for a hyper focus, particularly in those early days when you're trying to get some traction. And when he decided that his portfolio needed less Kaizen and more of something else, that was one of those moments where we kind of said, all right, let's make it so. And that we lovingly refer to that as the bootstrap phase. Because that was when all we had were boots. We didn't have anything. We didn't have any money.
Right.
So, but
it reminds me of the
Beatles.
It reminds me of the Beatles song where the lyrics were, you never give me your money, you only show me your funny paper. The Beatles they got everything they needed, but they didn't have any money, because the record labels had it.
And then we were fortunate because that early focus work that Mike and Kyle did on the phase 2 testing was indeed the correct read. Okay, that was not simply an academic exercise that some guy in some standard group dreamed up to torture people. It was in fact something that was delivered value and was perceived to have value. And once we had that in our pocket, not to mention our patents that came out in those days, all the semi-aqueous things were patented. Well, lo and behold, that work started turning into business, and it was modest in the beginning, and we were excited about orders that we don't notice today. But I still remember them vividly. So,
yes, yeah,
and then of course you go into the next phase, right? Is that in the beginning you need money to survive, but then you start to survive and you need money because working capital will kill you quicker than no customers. We went through a pretty strong growth spurt, and that created its own capital challenges.
Let's talk about that. Just to recap, Kaizen started, investor money, investor, of course, all investors get disenchanted, particularly if they're kind of novice investors, because they think they're going to, put $1 into a startup and get $1 million, in 2 weeks after that. When they realize that that's not the way it works, investor says, I'm not so enchanted anymore. You guys go through the bootstrap stage. You're living off credit cards and promises and things like that, which is a pretty typical journey. And then you start to grow. My recollection in our growth phase was growth is super expensive. Growth is a seduction, in my opinion. Growth is a seduction that many companies really can't afford, because they think the key to survival is growth, which there is certainly an element of truth to that. But growth for growth's sake, if you just say, I just need more, then I can incentivize my salespeople to bring in more sales. None of them will be profitable, but they can certainly bring in more sales. But the key is managed growth. So tell me how you managed growth in the real estate world. And I've said this on the show before, the three most important words in real estate is location, location, location. And I think the three most important words in a business startup is cash flow, cash flow, cash flow, right? And sometimes cash flow comes at the expense of profit. You can bring in money to cover payroll, but it's not profitable. So how did you balance those kind of polar opposite requirements of growth and cash flow? How did you walk that tightrope?
Well, the funny thing is, because our business on the material side, we sort of bang on the rock for a long time. And then the customer says, okay, I'm through my testing. I'm through my protocol. I've done every test under the sun. I'm confident it's going to win. Off we go, ready to start. So the phone rings with someone that you've been working with for months and months, in some cases years, and it's time to go. So the whole notion of managing growth is a little bit of an illusion, because you've got this pipeline full of things, and then in their own due course, they turn into actual business and revenue. So the real challenge in that case, back to the reactive nature of cleaning. Well, there's also the reactive nature of dealing with that. Well, now we've got to worry about inventory. You've got to worry about delivery times, credit from your suppliers, except you're a startup, so there isn't any. That sort of stuff. And Mike, you remember those days? It was bedlam. And then we were fortunate in the early days of the company. We had a big win at Motorola, who back then was a big deal. And of course, the business was on the other side of the world. And so, back, I can still remember this day. Now, 25 years ago, getting on a plane to meet distributors that I'd signed up on a fax machine at an airport to go turn on customers in various points in East Asia. All of those were dilemmas, and fortunately, none of them killed us, but half of them probably could have. I mean, Mike, what was your take on those days? I mean, it was, you were always very close to the customers.
Yeah, what I think, a couple of things that kind of defined us when we started to win business. We started to pick up a number of customers, meaningful customers, in a relatively short period of time, and so things were going better. And one of the key cultural pieces of Kaizen is that we were a customer centric organization. I mean, back Tom had mentioned it, but every customer that we were fortunate to win or to work with, we did everything we could to try to make them successful. We were looking out for their best interest, because we felt that if we could succeed with them, that would help us succeed. That was one of the key cultural pieces that is still with the organization today. So I think that was a really good thing. But the other thing that I thought was interesting was, from my standpoint, I enjoyed working with those customers. But when you look at the business side of it, and we bring Kyle back in, we bring Tom back in, one of the things that we did is we would win specific customers, we would look at going back to that cash flow piece and looking and saying, okay, where are we today and where can we continue to invest for tomorrow? And that was one of the strategic decisions that was made even early on, and it continued throughout our organization. That is, we met a gate. We said, how do we meet the next gate? And part of that is you need good people with different skill sets to get that done. And so, not only did we invest in infrastructures in different parts of the world, but one of our key successes has been investing in people.
Yeah, I think at the early days of business, the people is you, right? And eventually you start filling in those spots, because otherwise you're going to end up being like a restaurant with two tables. You're the chef, you're the busboy, you're the waiter, you're the bartender, you're everything, and then at some point you just reach that max out point. Besides cash flow, which is always a business challenge, not just in the beginning, but through various stages of the business. What other challenges did Kaizen have to overcome, particularly in the early days, and throughout its journey, for that matter? What kind of challenge roadblocks were thrown in front of you, and how did you get around those?
Well, as Mike said earlier, we had the no clean thing. No clean was a concept when the company was just getting going. It became a reality just as we were taking off. When we were really starting to grow, that was when no clean began to be more than an idea. It began to be an adopted technology, and that really did put the brakes on things for a while. It was. But we've also, this was an attractive market to lots of other companies. Over the years, there have been many competitors that also have, on any given day, somebody's mousetrap is better than somebody else's. And then again, you've got the advances out in the marketplace. I think our biggest challenges from a strategic perspective have mostly been staying in tune with the evolution of our customers. And that's every bit as challenging today as it was 25 or 30 years ago. In the beginning, frankly, remember, surface mount was new. Surface mount was a thing people talked about. The SMTA was invented because surface mount was new, and it was a way for people to gather to talk about that new technology. Well, the move from through hole to surface mount was something, but what's going on today is, from a cleaning perspective, in many ways far more challenging. And so that steady stream of challenges, and that's where Mike's been critically important, and that he early on moved into a role of the chief technology officer here, where his mission was to stay tuned in to those advances, because as we grew and we were able to attract talent, and we were also blessed that our environment was such that our talent tended to hang around. We tend to have a lot of very long-term employees. But they needed to be able to put it in perspective, right? What is that challenge? How can I help this customer believe that we're the right answer? Well, that's where applications labs became a big deal, and we put the first one of those in place, and we have developed those around the world, and they're tremendous tools to help customers help themselves solve those new problems. So that the constant change of technology, both from the contamination perspective, how many solder companies are there, Mike? I mean, can anybody even come up with a number? There's a lot of them.
There's a lot, but one of the things that was a fortunate thing for us back in the early days, and it was a challenge, is that back again we were thinking about Petrofirm. They were on the they were in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, they were considered, that semi-aqueous technology. And Tom, you remember when we first developed the solvent sprayable alcohol material, SSA, and what we were trying to do is trying to take that semi-aqueous approach and make it alive in an aqueous process. And, today, what we did there really has become the basis for how aqueous processes are run today. And so one of the big challenges was from my standpoint is how can we make it better? How can we do something better? I'm forgetting, Tom, you remember this when SSA was a big part of our business, and we said, hey, I think we can do this better. Or, you remember, Tom, when we decided to make a strategic, advancement from SSA to the next generation, and we bet our whole organization.
And we've done that a couple of times where we've and it's funny, the SSA thing is worth another comment. We were now in hindsight, we're really smart guys, so we know what happened all those years ago. In the moment, it's not always as obvious what's happening. That's
Sure.
The other part of the whole entrepreneur game is you wake up one day and something that's been going on for 6 months is clear to you now that you didn't understand yesterday, right?
Yeah,
well,
perspective.
I could still remember. The company wasn't 5 or 6 years old. We hired some new salesperson, and I was training them on stuff, talking about all the competitors. I was writing prices they charge and applied costs. And I had this moment that I realized everybody's applied cost was 10 to 15% less than mine. Everybody's. And what I realized, that meant we were actually in charge, which made absolutely no sense, right? We're this little startup. We couldn't possibly be in charge. But our SSA approach and the series of advances beyond that had literally disrupted the marketplace. Those old semi-aqueous technologies that, no longer, that was the day they started to fade. And it was remarkable. And those people tend to be solvent folks, and they never mostly made the jump into the aqueous zone. That just, for whatever reason, doesn't happen a lot. But Mike's right. I mean, several times over the years, we've said, well, we've got a great technology, but we think it's a little soft. Okay, we'll spend a year or two developing the next technology, and then off we go. That's the new horse. And if it, or I guess we live in the South, right? So it's if that new dog doesn't hunt for trouble, sort of thing, to pick a Southern metaphor. But I mean, and Mike was in the middle of that because he was in the middle of the inventing. He was in the middle of deciding, well, gee, is this good enough? Is it really the right play? But those were absolutely on the brink sort of moments. Granted, we're no Apple or anything like that, but I remember the stories when Steve Jobs and a bunch of people went back to some other garage and invented the Mac. And that was essentially disrupting their own company.
That's right. Yes.
On a far grander scale than we here at Kaizen, but it was kind of the same thing.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, I guess, when back in the SSA days, when you have a product, it's working for you, you're making money on it, you're gaining a reputation for it, and then you have to, come up with a decision to sacrifice that for something you think is better, but it hasn't been proven yet. And then all the energy that you've spent building the reputation and confidence in one product, then you have to kind of go to the customer and go, wait a minute, there's something better, and not knock the old technology. It's a fine balance, right, between selling a customer up on something. It's like, I know what we said. Yeah. Oh, well, exactly. I mean, you mentioned how many,
The other thing that's interesting about doing that is that whenever you go to your customer and say, hey, I think we've got a better approach, you open the door for your competition to get into that race.
Sure.
And so, but it turned out to be the right thing to do. I mean, we always looked and said, okay, let's back to what Tom had said, let's stay close to the market, let's understand where the challenges are, and let's try to continuously improve. That was another key motto of Kyzen Corporation. It was all built on continuous improvement. That's where the name came from. So, it just
Kaizen,
got to a
right?
point.
The Japanese term Kaizen, right?
That's exactly right. And so we were always willing to take that risk.
Talk about competition. When you come up with something new, you want to be ready to leap out of the gate, because the competition will, if it's good, the competition should jump on it. So there's a benefit to being first and being the leader in it. Tell me how competition works in business, particularly at Kaizen, or any business for that matter, but since we're talking Kaizen, what's your view on competition? Is competition a necessary evil? Is there a benefit to having competition? Is there such thing as healthy competition, unhealthy competition? How have your views changed, if they have, from the early days of competition to maybe now that you and most of your competition are more mature companies now? What's the attitude of competitors now? New competitors or old competitors? Do they have a place in the market? Should they be there? Should they not be there? Are they benefiting your company? Are they hurting your company? Just in general, we don't need to get specific with any particular company.
No. Well, I guess from a business school perspective, and I'm stealing one of Mike's favorite phrases here. If you don't have a competitor, you don't actually have a business.
Right.
That's in Webster someplace that actually says that, and it's true. So but as through the life cycle of the company, back in the early days, we were like Gulliver's Travels, and we were the Lilliputians. We were like this little mouse that was running around among what we perceived to be giants, and some of them were giants actually. Of course, we were nimble, but of course, if they stepped on us, that nimbleness wasn't going to help us very much. But as time goes on, what because our market is so dynamic and so big, they think of the land of electronic assembly. I mean, how many companies do that? It's thousands of companies. Innovations are nearly constant. Where a better mousetrap, a smaller mousetrap nowadays, a mousetrap that you can do from your phone, a mousetrap that you can do with wiggling your nose instead of touching your phone. And nobody's view on that is right. So what we believe competition helps all of us, because everyone tries to do an innovation. And when you really crack the nut, like what we did with SSA, the advantage the second guy has is he doesn't have to worry whether you can do it differently. He just has to worry how to do it better differently. And that's it. It's like once the right brothers figured out how to get off the ground, everybody knew you could do it. Now they just had to figure out, well, how can I do it? Because what they were doing was kind of strange. And so and Mike's done a lot of studies on this stuff over the years, but competition, I think, helps the marketplace, helps each of the competitors, because if we're not moving forward, we're not going to succeed. I mean, Mike, you've given us a lot of thought over the years.
Well, competition really drives innovation, because let's face it, we're always trying to, or competition, the market competition is always trying to do it better. And if you stay close to your market and understand what it is, it helps you to evolve. One of the things that a lot of companies, and there's a reason why a lot of companies fail over time is, one of the reasons I think is that, you put a lot of energy to start a business, and then once you get there, and you maintain that business, you now start to protect that real estate that you put into play. But if you're not willing to disrupt it, if you're not willing to step out and say, what's the next generation, or what can we do better along those ways, sooner or later you'll mature and you will die. And so one of the things that I think competition does is that companies are trying to do it better. And so as they try to do it better, what can we do better? It helps us to look outside of ourselves and say, how do we continuously evolve as an organization, and how can we become of greater value to the companies we get to serve? And so from that standpoint, I think without competition, you don't have a market. So I don't look at competition as being evil at all. It's just a part of the marketplace that we all chose to be a part of. And so how do we as an organization not fixate on what they're doing, but be fixated on what we can do to grow our organization?
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember in our early
one other
days.
Point on that competition thing, if I might,
sure,
is that we've wound up being modest-sized global enterprises. And we have, in some cases, we have different competitors in different parts of the world that do one slice, kind of like, the hospital's competing with the surgical guy down the street for
Right.
one little piece of their business, And so part of that, listening to the marketplace and engaging, understanding your competition, not fixating on them, is recognizing that, culturally, from a diversity perspective, different people from different parts of the world view things differently. And a lot of times that their perspective is better than yours. So you can sometimes learn things about corners of the market by what your competitors are doing, because on any particular day in some particular location, they may be, a little more savvy than you are. But once you see it going on, back to that second guy sometimes has an advantage because, oh, well, that works. It's the first mover does have an advantage, but sometimes the second guy leapfrogs.
Right. When you look at Apple, they get a lot of credit for being innovators, but they were not the first at very many things. If you think about it, their cell phones came out, after BlackBerry established that we can turn smartphones and we can turn phones into smartphones. And the mouse came from Xerox PARC, and the whole graphic user interface, the whole GUI thing came from a different type of machine. I mean, they were exploiters, and I don't mean that in a negative way. They took technology which was underutilized and exploited it. And I think there is a healthy competition. It's like a ship going down a body of water that's never been traveled before. All these captains going, well, you first, we'll follow you. And if you hit a reef, thank you, we'll go around it, right? So I guess you do need competition for that. I share your opinion on competition. I think it is healthy, even though in the moment it could be divisive. I think in the long run, in the big picture, it's definitely healthy. So you guys are arguably in a business that you won't agree with this, but I think you can agree that many other people consider your product a commodity, right? It's as your friends say, your social friends, Tom, say, it's soap, right? So I know it's not a commodity. You know it's not a commodity. But many buyers view it as a commodity. Their job is to find the right soap at the right price, and 2 cents a gallon might make a difference. So how do you take a product that you've put your blood, sweat, and tears in and all this research and it's definitely not a soap, but how do you stand out from the commodity crowd? How do you sell the value of a product that many would consider a commodity? I think that's a challenge.
Well, Mike is the shining example of that, and could probably speak to it best, because it only starts with the product. So, Mike,
it's all about the process.
Right.
It's all about the process. When we think about what we do, the clean material is only one piece of it. If it's not all integrated together and working cohesively together, then it doesn't work. And so I think part of the value equation is that understanding all phases of that process, and how we as an organization can help our customers be able to do that, whether they're running it in an aqueous technology machine or somebody else's machine. How do you control the material sets going in, the inputs in and out, and how do we help the customer optimize their process? And so I think part of it is that, you could say soap is a commodity, but I don't look at us as being a soap supplier. I look at us as being a company that's helping customers achieve a specific objective that they need to achieve to drive reliability. And so if we stay along those lanes and we help our customers get there, they don't necessarily drive it back as we're a soap supplier. And it's the engineers that really drive our business in the end. So I think that's how you go away from being a commodity in our business.
And part of that too is I've often said over the years that we're consultants that get paid by the barrel, and that the cleaning is right at that end of the manufacturing process, the most delicate point, right, where the bill of materials is all in play, but we're not quite ready to get to the loading dock and packaging. And so cleaning is in some ways a high risk process, right? Because it's right there, and it's where every variation, Mike, in many of your talks, you talked about how, we may have stopped cleaning flux, but what about all that other stuff? Well, there are so many inputs that go into making an assembly. There's so many different processes and machines and handling and all this other stuff. They all come together. They go through the cleaning machine, and at the other end, life is, purity and grace is what comes out at the end, right? Well, sometimes it doesn't work out that way, right? It worked out that way yesterday, but for some reason today, not so much. Well, in this era of limited staffing and efficiency, which means less people, the bandwidth to resolve those dilemmas is often very constrained at many of our customers. And so we find ourselves that consultant role where we help them be troubleshooters and help them resolve that dilemma. Well, why was it good yesterday but not today? Gee, my cleaning process, nothing seems to have changed, yet I'm getting a different outcome. Well, that means something before the cleaning process changed.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of customers they're just very busy. They're stretched staff wise. They don't have the resources to delve into those things. And a key part of how we differentiate back to that stay close to the customer, it's not just stay close to their knowledge and where they're going and what they're doing. We talked about that for market changes, but it's stay close to them physically. That's why the pandemic's been rough on us. We're very much out there with the customer. What's going on? How are you doing? And looking around because, we've been wandering these plants. Our team has been in these plants for years. And if things seem a little wacky, we can pick up on that sometimes and we can try to be helpful. And that's a key value adder for us, that sharing of our expertise to help them succeed. It's all about, we only succeed if our customers succeed. And that obviously that the first part of that is the product comes out and it's clean. That's great. But it's fundamentally, how do they have a robust, resilient process that can accommodate those inevitable little bumps and shakes that, all manufacturing processes vary. Just like a ship, right? Ships, you were talking about the ship going, and hitting the reef or whatever. Well, when the ship's going down, it's wiggling a little bit back and forth, right? Well, if everything goes on to one side, it's when it falls over. All right. And a manufacturing process is quite similar. All those variations tend to work themselves out, but if they all lean the wrong way at the wrong time, that's when there's a problem. And we try to be deeply involved to help people address those issues or prevent them when we can. And that's a key part of us because, as you know, there are no more purchasing agents. There are commodity buyers.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a race to the bottom.
I personally find that
people.
offensive.
I do too. It is a race to the bottom. People are not buying value; they're buying commodities, and their job is they're rewarded on the savings they could get. And what most buyers, well, I don't know if they don't realize it or if they don't care to realize it. If a small business, particularly a startup, is working on a 10%, after tax profit, which would be enviable for any small startup business, right? To even be in the black at all. And someone wants a, 1% discount on, or 5% discount on the price. That's your profit. That's all of it. People don't realize that, take $100 off the retail price, and that's 80% of your profit, in terms of after tax. So, it's important that businesses stay in business to support those customers that bought those cheap products, right? So there are diminishing returns when it comes to driving your supplier's costs down. You're not doing yourself any favor in the long run. You might be hitting your bonus, but you're not doing your company any favor in the long run because you're just stripping away your supplier's ability to service you in the future. But that's a topic for another day.
And I've got an example that aligns with that. I had a neighbor who worked at an automotive company who shall remain nameless. Okay. And their stated goals was we're trying to reduce our input costs by 10% a year. And he told me a story once that they were in the office talking amongst themselves, and somebody said, "Is this the year they pay us 10% to sell to us because it's been 10 years and we're driving the costs out?"
Right.
Back to your race to the bottom thing is that it's fundamentally, for suppliers to add value, they have to be able to make payroll and have some reward that makes it worth the bother.
Sure. And invest in the future.
Whether you're Tesla, General Motors, SpaceX, IBM, whoever you are, Kaizen or Aqueous Tech, doesn't matter. We all have that same fundamental dilemma. But it comes down to perceptions of value, and again, our focus has always been, if we're adding value in and around what we do above and beyond the product, we've got a better shot at that equation working out for our customers. And Mike's been a key part of that, since the early days, because when things do go bump in the night, they reach out to people that they think have the answers, and he's always been one of those fellows.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Mike's kind of the face of the company, and Tom too, but for different things. Tom, right. You're the talking about the industry guy, and Mike is the talking about how the product works guy, as I experienced it. How much of Kaizen's success would you attribute to Mike and Tom and Kyle and the team, and how much would you attribute it to luck? Give me a percentage.
I think it depends on your time horizon. Okay.
There you go.
If you were going to go back and pick a day back in 92 or 3, when we were just getting going and we were trying mightily, I'd say, the luck quotient was pretty high on that day. All right. But fundamentally, it's while it's better to be lucky than good on any day, what our team does, and it's way more than Mike and Kyle or myself or any of the other leaders or anybody, we've developed a culture, and Kyle's really the core of the culture, all right, that embodies all this stuff that we've talked about, taking care of the customers, continuous improvement and innovation. And frankly, the biggest leadership challenge is making sure that everybody on the team, whether it's the he or she on the loading dock or a salesperson or technical person, over in the Far East someplace, that they embody that too. And that they not only project it, not so much like a branding kind of thing, but they embrace it. And when doing right by your customers, the watchword, people don't have to ask their boss what to do, because doing the right thing is usually pretty darn obvious. And we've empowered our team to do the right thing. And sometimes they go, man, okay, sometimes it's a tall drink of water, and sometimes it's easier. But that's what's created our success, is that empowering the he or she, the guy or the gal out working with the customer, say, we can help, and here's what we can do. And then when they call back to the front office, they get, well, that was a great idea, rather than what are you thinking? And doing that, now decade after decade. And Mike's famous for that. I mean, he in the early days, he'd come back and he'd go, well, here's kind of what happened, and here's what I told him we'd do. And Mike, I don't know if you remember those days. I remember them well.
Yeah, I was always noted for writing the blank checks, but the checks always seem to get cashed.
Somehow you had enough funds, barely enough funds. Two last questions, as we're running a little late here. One is, Mike, you Kyzen and another company got together and started a new company called Magnalytics, which makes cleanliness testing assessment equipment, surface insulation resistance equipment specifically. How has your experience with Kyzen benefited your startup with Magnalytics? Did you do things different? I mean, besides the reputation that you have, no one knew who Mike Bixenman was or Kyle Doyle was or Tom Forsythe was in the earliest days of Kaizen. You were all new on the scene, just like I was when I started my company. But now, so besides the fact that people know Mike and they know Kaizen and they know the other company involved, besides that, how much of what you've learned from your experience with Kaizen has benefited the startup phase of Magnalytics?
Mike, I mean, it's funny. We talk about this every day. All right. When, in fact, just the other day, we were getting ready for this call, and we sat around and talked for about an hour just to kind of refresh old memories and things like that. And Mike, you commented to me that it really is kind of a deja vu sort of thing. Because why don't you share what you were thinking, Mike? How things seem to repeat.
Oh, we lost Mike.
We lost Mr. Bix. Well, then I'll share what he said, or we can do this. Maybe
he'll probably come back in. I'll keep an eye out for him. I'm sure he'll come back in.
So, but it was really funny because I remember those days vividly, right? Because I remember I missed the investment phase. I was in the bootstrap phase, and Magnalytics is kind of in that same place. It's new. It's a new idea. It's partially old, partially new, and perceptions and explaining things and helping people get it. It's so similar that I find myself having a series of flashbacks that, we're working on something for Magnalytics, or Mike asked me about something, and I'll go, oh, well, gosh, that reminds me of, remember this, and because I said this in the very beginning, Mike, I do believe that startups have a lot more in common with each other than they have different in those early days. There's always a shortage of resources. There's always a shortage of time, and there's a shortage of full understanding. You've got a great idea, but it's usually some sort of new space, to some degree. And so every day you're learning. Reminds me, like, I was a military guy, right? And I went to business school, and I have this funny story I tell about the accounting class I took there. I would sit in the class and I go, and the professor noticed this after a while, and he talked to me after class with it. Says, well, I do that when I realize that you've just told me the truth for something that I believed I understood, and I was completely wrong. Okay. And it turned out that every single thing I thought about accounting was completely wrong. And this class was kind of like some person that lived in the jungle finding a cell phone or something.
Yeah.
And,
right.
And but that's what a startup's like. You at best know half of what you need to know, and you got to be constantly open to be willing to learn and embrace those new ideas, because it wasn't that you were dumb yesterday. It's just that you guessed, and you guessed wrong.
Right.
You didn't know.
Right.
And you gotta make decisions. You got to move forward. You got to guess. It's an educated guess. It's a somewhat informed decision, but in the startup days, plenty of them are wrong. And Magnalytics is experiencing that same phenomena, because again, it's a piece of test equipment. That's not what we do. You're in the machine business. We were never really in that business. And so it's been enlightening to see Mike working on that and the limited areas that I'm involved. There he is. He's back.
Mike's back.
Hey, I don't know what happened. I apologize.
No. Hey, it's the world of the internet. It's the world of virtual meetings. It works most of the time, not all the time. So, and Tom covered for you. He was carrying the torch. We're almost out of time. I do want to ask Tom. Did you finish that thought?
That was kind of
okay.
It's sort of a deja vu experience, I guess, in short.
Right.
That, we're learning lots of things on a regular basis, some of which we thought we knew yesterday that turned out not to be true.
Yes. When I left my company, I left a company in our industry and started my company in this industry, and they were not happy with that. They accused me of stealing their ideas and whatever, and their business practices, and they were right in that that I did see them do things which resulted in pretty extreme failure. And I did learn what not to do. In fact, most of the takeaways I had from that experience was, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And it obviously it helped me. So I think failure is, failure leads to success as much as success leads to success if you learn from it and recalibrate. My last question is back in the early days when you guys were bootstrapping, probably, I remember seeing the first ad that Kaizen put out. I don't know if it was the first one I saw. And it was something to the effect of 50 reasons to buy Kaizen products. And the last reason was 2LG2Q, literally the number 2 LG2Q. And of course, this was back in the probably late 80s or very early 90s. So we got to understand what music was playing back then. But someone tell me what that meant and why that was on there.
Mike, do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, it was driven by Kyle. It's too legit to quit. We in those early days, back when we were talking about, hey, our funding, dried up, and here we were, a group of guys that, we had to self-fund ourselves. We weren't getting paid. And it was, I think, at the end of the year, and Kyle had that too legit to quit, and so it stayed with us throughout the years. And as a matter of fact, it comes up. I think we had a birthday party, I don't know, and it came up again. Too legit to quit. That song. I don't know who played the song, but that's what. I think
it was it J.C. Hammer, Mike? One of the
MC Hammer or something. Yeah, I don't know.
There it is.
Yeah. And, our audience will correct us if we're wrong.
A funny thing about that, Mike, when we put that ad in, it was the 100 Reasons, and it was
100 Reasons.
It was this, I remember it to this day. It was this kind of dark blue background and kind of what I considered orange. I am not the color aficionado. Orange letters on it, which struck me as odd at the time. But we got loads of people actually asked us what that was, and at the time we were kind of embarrassed by it. All right, because at the time it was true. We were too legit to quit, but we on more than a few days had plenty of reasons if we decided to. And we were kind of embarrassed to talk about it, so we didn't actually explain it in the early days of what it was. We waited till we kind of got over the hump.
Yeah.
Where, the dark days were a fond memory.
Yeah.
But so that actually, we were shocked that people actually noticed that.
Oh, it turned out probably it was not meant for this purpose, but it turned out to be a little marketing gimmick, right? Because it did plant something in there that no one knew what it meant, and it created this curiosity factor. That would have been
the luck factor was high
on that day. Yes, on that day with that ad. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Mike Bixenman and Tom Forsythe, thank you so much for being my guest today on Concept of Creation. And I don't need to say this. Good luck in the future. I think you're past the luck stage, although we can all use it. But certainly, I enjoy seeing the new direction that Kaizen's taken with Magnalytics, and I look forward to working with you guys for many years to come. Thanks for being my guest.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It was our pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching episode number 4 of the Concept to Creation podcast. And a special thanks go out to my guests today, Dr. Mike Bixenman and Tom Forsythe of Kyzen Corporation. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or virtually wherever you get your podcasts. And regardless of where you get your podcasts, be sure and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app to be notified when new episodes are released. We do release new episodes on the first and third Tuesday of each month. Also, if you're listening to this in your car and you'd like to see the video version of this podcast, visit our YouTube channel, the Concept to Creation YouTube channel, and be sure and subscribe to the show and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new episodes are released. My email address is right down here. If you have any questions or episode suggestions, feel free to reach out to me and let me know. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, and I'll see you again very soon.
I was meant to be free. meant to be free.